People often ask me, how does an attitude of forgiveness facilitate conflict resolution? So if you've ever wondered, how can forgiveness help resolve conflicts? Then this video is for you, because in this video, I'm going to share with you the surprising benefits that forgiveness brings both to the forgiver and to the forgiven. Now that might be surprising. Stick around to the end and I'll also share empirical research that shows that forgiveness, instead of holding grudges and instead of retaliation, is the dominant and the preferred strategy in negotiation. Let me start there by acknowledging my own special interest in forgiveness for a bunch of reasons. First, as a Christian, and specifically as a practicing Catholic, forgiveness is at the heart of faith. Indeed, part of my own interest as a negotiation and conflict resolution expert came from my own interest in the topic of forgiveness and conflict. Second, as someone who's been on both ends of the forgiveness train, meaning as someone who's been hurt pretty badly by people, and as someone who's also offended others, I have a lived sense of the importance of forgiveness in conflict resolution. Finally, as a mediator who brings a more relational focus to his work, forgiveness is often at the heart of my professional work. So let me start by also saying that forgiveness is not the same as restoring someone to where they may have stood with you before they hurt, injured, or offended you. One who forgives may choose to restore the perpetrator to their original station, but forgiveness doesn't require that. What forgiveness does require is a commitment not to hold a grudge or to hold the past behavior against the other person as a debit that is owed. Forgiveness and conflict resolution, then, is a release of claims against another for the wrongs they have made done to you. Now, let me share the surprising benefits of forgiveness and conflict resolution. First, forgiveness actually reduces the likelihood of retaliation. At the most practical level, forgiveness can break the cycle of violence. So let me describe this research around a dynamic that has been termed the accuser-excuser bias. So according to this bias, human beings are prone to over-assume negative intentionality when they are hurt or injured. That's called the accuser bias. And when we engage in that and we assume the other side intended to hurt us, we tend to get angry and then retaliate. Now, this is when the excuser bias comes into play. The person against whom we're retaliating says, I didn't mean that. Why are you overreacting? Excuser bias. But then they say, you certainly meant that, accuser bias. And then they retaliate against us, and that's what leads to a conflict spiral. So forgiveness is the thing that breaks the accuser-excuser bias. Consider two siblings fighting in the back of the car over territory. One hits the other and slides over onto his sister's side. She shoves him, yells, and pushes back. And then, to the surprise of the parents, the brother doesn't retaliate, but sits there and says, it's okay that you hit me. I know I'm not perfect either, and offers one of his cookies to his sister. Within minutes, the siblings are giggling with each other in the back seat. While this relatable example seems the stuff of kids, forgiveness moments like this also happen with adults all the time. Second, forgiveness promotes healing and closure. In many conflict situations, the official hostilities may have ceased, but there is still relational bleeding and woundedness that can be healed with forgiveness. Forgiveness can open up a space for the forgiven person to move forward and accept a second chance. Let me give you an example taken from the Broadway musical Les Miserables, which I suspect many of you have seen. So the protagonist in this play is Jean Valjean, who is a petty thief who is taken in by a bishop. And then, even though this kind bishop has been generous to him, he ends up stealing the candlesticks from the bishop's home. Jean Valjean is caught by the constable, whose name is Javert, and brought back to the bishop. And the bishop says to the constable, no, I actually gave Jean Valjean these candlesticks. and then he forgives Valjean. That act sticks with Jean Valjean for the rest of his life. It transforms who he is as a human being. And the rest of the show is about this person who basically becomes a vessel of goodness and generosity in his life. Now, obviously, this is a Broadway show, but I want to make an important point here, because many times there's an assumption that forgiveness is just for the forgiven, and this is an example where it certainly was for the forgiven. And certainly it's the case that someone who's forgiven can feel an enormous burden lifted. But I also want to suggest that forgiveness is also for the forgiver. Research has shown that people who forgive others, even when the perpetrator is uninterested in or rejects that forgiveness, experience a greater sense of closure and peace than those who hold grudges. This is the great paradox of forgiveness in my mind. The benefits of forgiveness accrue to those who forgive as much as those who are forgiven. Let's consider the case of the racially motivated massacre in the AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2014. Many of you will remember that the members of that church actually chose to forgive Dylan Roof. This clearly was not easy, but the members of that church report experiencing a sense of healing from those tremendous acts of forgiveness. Third, forgiveness allows for the possibility of relationship building and trust formation. So in situations where there is a desire or a need for an ongoing relationship, forgiveness can be the balm of rebuilding a relationship and starting to learn from mistakes and starting to build trust. Now, let me be clear. There are many situations, particularly when there are abusive ones, where rebuilding a relationship or working to restore trust is not advisable. But in situations where both parties have a desire to rebuild a relationship, expressions of forgiveness are like a turbocharge or a reboot. It's like hitting a reset button of sorts. It doesn't mean that mutual damage wasn't done, and it doesn't mean it won't take time to rebuild, but it lays a foundation for something new. It's like the tilling of old soil that allows new seeds to grow. So forgiveness can play a major and positive role in conflict resolution. Before we go though, I want to debunk a myth held by many that has been disproven in the empirical research, because many suggest that forgiveness can actually embolden aggression, teaching a perpetrator bad lessons or encouraging them to egregious or offensive behavior. While this is of course possible, research suggests that forgiveness is part of a best or most dominant strategy in negotiation. Many years ago, Robert Axelrod of the University of Michigan wanted to look at what strategy did best in what's called an iterative prisoner's dilemma game. It's a negotiation of sorts where parties can choose to either cooperate with each other or to not cooperate with each other. And the way these games work is if both sides cooperate, both sides get a good number of points. But if one side cooperates and the other side defects, the side that defects does really well. It gets a huge number of points, and the side that cooperates does poorly. And so what Axelrod did is he took all different strategies, had them play against each other in a computer-generated series, and the research showed that the strategy that did best followed 4 really simple rules. The first rule was that strategies that started as cooperators and always stayed as cooperators as long as the other side cooperated did really well. But secondly, right, if the other side defected, you need to become provocable, meaning you need to move to defection. So the second rule was provocability. But here's where forgiveness came in. Because as soon as the defecting side moved back to cooperation, the best strategy automatically moved back to cooperation and stayed there. So in other words, it didn't try to catch up. It didn't hold a grudge. It basically said, I will be forward looking. And in conflicts and negotiations, of course we can't be a sucker. If someone is, beating us over with a bat, we have to defend ourselves.
Defense mechanism from all that bullying.
But the notion that somehow I want retribution and to make you pay for this is not a strategy that does as well as a strategy that's ready to forgive as soon as the other side is prepared to move forward cooperatively. So in closing, let me say there are many dimensions of forgiveness we didn't really discuss here. We didn't discuss what does forgiveness look like when the perpetrator doesn't actually think they did anything wrong or doesn't feel like they need forgiveness. We also didn't discuss whether forgiveness is even possible in the face of ongoing injury. We didn't discuss the distinction between someone forgiving someone in a relationship versus perhaps an entire society forgiving an individual or a people who may have committed a genocide of some sort. Clearly, all of these topics demand much closer attention and consideration. For now, though, suffice to say that forgiveness can play a major positive role in conflict resolution. It reduces the chances of retaliation, it promotes healing and closure, and it creates conditions for the possible restoration of a relationship and a new attempt at trust building. So, if you want to learn more about research such as Axelrod's negotiation strategy, or if you want to learn more about negotiation and conflict resolution generally, I hope you'll consider taking one of the classes I offer through the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. And of course, stay here to watch my next video on what happens if you don't agree in a mediation. I'm Bob Bordone. Thanks for watching, and let's keep negotiating together. Here's the next video.